What if I told you that there's a tower somewhere in the desert that God himself had to come down and stop? Not because it was evil, but because it was too successful. You've heard of the Tower of Babel, right? Most people think it's just about some ancient people building a tall building and God getting angry. But that's not the real story. The real story is far more shocking, far more relevant, and far more dangerous than anything you've been told. See, Babel wasn't just about a tower. It was about the day humanity almost broke the universe. And the scariest part, we're doing it again right now. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel where we explore the stories that shaped our world. If you're new here, I'm about to take you on a journey through one of the most misunderstood events in human history. By the end of this video, you'll never look at skyscrapers, technology, or even the internet the same way again. But first, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Trust me, you'll want to be part of this community when we dive into stories like this. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how our community spans the globe, kind of like the story we're about to tell. Now, here's what most people don't understand about Babel. This wasn't a story about punishment. It was a story about prevention. God didn't destroy the tower because he was angry. He scattered humanity because they were about to succeed. The Bible says something absolutely chilling about this moment. After seeing what the people of Babel had accomplished, God said, "Nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them." Think about that for a second. The creator of the universe looked at human cooperation and said, "If I don't stop this now, there will be no limits to what they can achieve." That's not a punishment. That's a compliment wrapped in a warning. So what exactly were they building that scared God himself? What was this tower really for? And why does this ancient story hold the key to understanding every major conflict, every technological breakthrough, and every social movement happening in our world today? We're about to find out, but I need to warn you, once you understand the real story of Babel, you can't unsee it. You'll start recognizing the pattern everywhere, in Silicon Valley, in the United Nations, in social media platforms that connect billions of people with the click of a button. The Tower of Babel wasn't just built once, it's being built right now, all around us. And just like the first time, nobody sees it coming until it's too late. Are you ready to discover heaven's most dangerous secret? The one truth that powerful people throughout history have tried to hide. The reason why unity terrifies authority more than rebellion ever could. Let's go back to the beginning, to a world that had just survived the end of everything, to 8 people standing on a mountain, looking out at an empty planet, holding the future of humanity in their hands. But before we dive in, I have to ask you something. As we explore this incredible story together, if something I share resonates with you, or if you're shocked by what you learn, hit that like button. It helps more people discover these hidden truths. And seriously, you're going to want to share this with someone when we get to the parts about how this connects to today's world. Coming up next, we'll witness the most important moment in human history that no one talks about. The day Noah's family stepped off the ark and had to decide the future of civilization. The choice they made led directly to Babel, and their decision is still shaping our world today. But here's the question that will haunt you. If you had been there, standing on that empty earth with unlimited possibilities, what would you have chosen? Stay tuned, because the answer might surprise you. Imagine waking up to a world where you are literally the only people left alive. No cities, no roads, no sounds except the wind. 8 people: Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, standing on Mount Ararat, looking out at a planet that had been washed completely clean. The silence must have been deafening. For months, they had heard nothing but the sounds of water and the creaking of the ark. Now, stepping onto dry ground for the first time in over a year, they face something no humans had ever experienced before or since: a completely empty world. Think about what that means. Every restaurant, every hospital, every school, gone. Every road, every bridge, every building, wiped away. Every song, every story, every piece of human knowledge, lost, except for what these 8 people could remember. They were humanity's backup file, the only copy left. Noah's first act wasn't to explore or build shelter. It was to worship. He built an altar and offered sacrifices, sending smoke up into the sky. And God responded with a promise that still gives me chills every time I read it. Never again will I destroy the world with a flood. But here's what most people miss. God didn't just make a promise. He gave them a command that would change everything. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Fill the earth. Not build a city. Not stay together. Fill the earth. Spread out. Scatter. This is crucial, because what happens next only makes sense when you understand that scattering was actually God's plan from the beginning. But humans, being humans, had other ideas. The 8 survivors began to have children. Lots of children. The Bible gives us some names, but imagine the conversations that happened around those early campfires. Stories about the world before. Descriptions of cities and technologies that no longer existed. Warnings about what happens when humanity goes too far. These weren't just bedtime stories. They were the complete history of civilization, passed down through oral tradition. Every mistake, every achievement, every lesson learned the hard way. Among these children was a boy named Cush, and Cush had a son who would change the course of human history forever. His name was Nimrod. Now, if you're enjoying this deep dive into the real story behind Babel, could you do me a favor and hit that like button? It really helps the channel, and I promise the story gets even more fascinating from here. Nimrod grew up hearing stories about the world before the flood. But unlike his relatives, who were content to tend flocks and plant crops, Nimrod had bigger plans. Much bigger plans. He became a hunter. Not just any hunter. The Bible calls him a mighty hunter before the Lord. That phrase in Hebrew suggests someone of legendary skill, someone whose reputation spreads far beyond his actual accomplishments. But Nimrod wasn't just hunting animals. He was hunting something far more dangerous, an idea. You see, as Noah's descendants spread out across the earth, they faced real dangers. Wild animals were multiplying faster than livestock. Weather could be harsh and unpredictable. Small groups were vulnerable to disease, starvation, and attack. Nimrod looked at this scattered, struggling humanity and saw inefficiency. Why should people live in fear when they could live in strength? Why should knowledge be fragmented when it could be shared? Why should humanity remain weak when it could become powerful? He began to gather followers. At first, it was just for hunting expeditions, but gradually, his influence grew. People started looking to him not just for protection from wild beasts, but for leadership in all things. And that's when Nimrod had his vision, a vision that would lead to the most ambitious construction project in human history. A vision that would unite all of humanity under one banner, in one place, for one purpose. But was it God's vision, or was it something else entirely? Here's what's really wild about this story. Everything that happened at Babel, the rapid technological advancement, the massive construction project, the social organization required to coordinate thousands of workers, it all started with one man's desire to protect people. Nimrod didn't set out to challenge God. He set out to help humanity. He wanted to solve real problems with practical solutions. Sound familiar? Every technological revolution, every social movement, every attempt to make the world a better place starts with the same motivation: good intentions, practical solutions, the desire to help. So when did helping become dangerous? When does unity become a threat? When does human achievement cross the line from blessing to curse? Coming up next, we'll meet the man who convinced an entire generation to abandon God's plan of scattering and instead gather in one place. We'll discover how Nimrod's charisma and vision created the world's first global empire. And we'll uncover the psychological techniques he used that modern leaders still copy today. But here's the question I want you to think about. In our hyper-connected world, where technology allows instant global communication and coordination, are we living in Nimrod's dream or God's nightmare? Nimrod wasn't supposed to become famous. According to God's plan, he should have been just another descendant of Noah, living in a small tribe somewhere, raising his family and tending his flocks. But Nimrod had other plans. The Bible tells us he was a mighty hunter before the Lord, but ancient Jewish traditions add details that will blow your mind. They say Nimrod was so skilled that he could face down lions with his bare hands, that wild animals would submit to him without a fight, that he never missed his target, ever. But here's where it gets really interesting. The same traditions tell us that Nimrod's hunting prowess was actually supernatural. Some rabbis believed he was wearing the original clothes that God made for Adam and Eve, and that these clothes gave him power over all living creatures. Whether you believe that or not, everyone agreed on one thing: Nimrod was different, special, chosen, and he knew it. Picture this scene. A young man, maybe in his 20s, returning from another impossible hunting expedition. He's carrying prey that should have taken a dozen men to bring down. The village gathers around him, amazed, asking how he did it. Nimrod doesn't just tell them about the hunt. He tells them about his vision. "Look at us," he says, gesturing to the scattered families around him. "We live in fear. We hide from the very animals we're supposed to rule. We struggle alone when we could thrive together. Our children will grow up weak, ignorant, and afraid unless we do something about it." The crowd listens. This young hunter has never led them astray. "But what if," Nimrod continues, "we didn't have to live this way? What if we gathered together, shared our knowledge, combined our strength? What if we built something so magnificent, so permanent, that our children would never know fear again?" This wasn't just a speech. It was a revolution wrapped in common sense. Think about it from their perspective. They were living as nomads in a dangerous world. Wild animals were everywhere. Disease could wipe out a small tribe overnight. Knowledge was constantly being lost when elderly people died without properly training replacements. Nimrod's solution seemed brilliant. Centralization. Bring all the scattered tribes together in one place. Share resources, combine expertise, create safety through unity. And it worked. Oh boy, did it work. Families began packing up their belongings and following Nimrod toward the land of Shinar. Not just a few families, entire tribes. The movement grew like wildfire, spreading from group to group across the known world. But here's what I find fascinating about Nimrod's character. The Bible doesn't portray him as evil. It doesn't say he was worshipping false gods or leading people into sin. He's described as mighty, successful, and influential. So what was the problem? The problem was that Nimrod's plan directly contradicted God's command to fill the earth. Instead of scattering, humanity was gathering. Instead of spreading out across the planet, they were concentrating in one location. And Nimrod was just getting started. When the first families arrived in Shinar, they found their leader already hard at work. He had surveyed the valley, marked out boundaries for different districts, and begun planning infrastructure that would support a massive population. This wasn't a casual settlement. This was urban planning on a scale that wouldn't be seen again for thousands of years. Nimrod had divided the city into specialized quarters, one area for craftsmen, another for farmers, a third for traders. He created systems for distributing food, managing waste, and maintaining order among thousands of people who had never lived in such close proximity before. But the most impressive part, he made it all seem natural, inevitable, obviously right. I want you to hit pause on this story for a second and think about modern parallels. How many times have you heard leaders promise that technology will solve humanity's problems? That global cooperation is the key to peace. That bringing people together under one system, one currency, one government will eliminate conflict and create prosperity. Sound familiar? Nimrod was humanity's first globalist. He looked at the scattered, struggling tribes of his day and offered them something irresistible: unity, security, and shared prosperity. And just like today's global movements, it started with the best of intentions. The settlement in Shinar began to thrive beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Trade routes developed almost overnight. Innovations in agriculture and craftsmanship appeared daily. The standard of living for Nimrod's followers improved dramatically. Word spread. More tribes came. The city grew larger, more prosperous, more influential. But Nimrod's ambition was just beginning to unfold. As he watched his city rise from the plains of Shinar, he conceived a plan so audacious, so unprecedented, that it would either crown him as humanity's greatest leader or mark him as its most dangerous enemy. Before I tell you what that plan was, I need to ask, are you seeing the parallels to our modern world? Drop a comment below about which current global movement or technology reminds you most of Nimrod's approach. I read every single comment, and I'm curious about your thoughts. Coming up next, we'll witness the greatest migration in human history. We'll see how Nimrod's charisma and vision convinced people from every corner of the earth to abandon their homes and join his grand experiment. And we'll discover the psychological techniques he used that are still being used by powerful leaders today. But here's the disturbing question. If Nimrod appeared in our world today, with his charisma, his vision, and his track record of success, would you follow him? And how would you know if you already are? Have you ever seen footage of people migrating to a new opportunity? Maybe the California gold rush, or families moving to Detroit during the auto boom. Now multiply that by 1,000, and you'll start to understand what happened when word spread about Nimrod's city. This wasn't just migration. This was the reshaping of human civilization. Picture caravans stretching to the horizon, families carrying everything they owned on their backs or in crude carts, children walking beside their parents, eyes wide with excitement about the promised land they'd heard so much about. They came from every direction, from the mountains where Japheth's descendants had settled, from the southern lands where Ham's children had built their communities, from the eastern valleys where Shem's tribes had grown strong. Different languages, different customs, different skills, all converging on one location, Shinar. But here's what makes this story even more remarkable. These weren't desperate refugees fleeing disaster. These were successful, established communities, voluntarily abandoning their homes to join something bigger than themselves. What could possibly motivate entire tribes to leave everything behind and start over? The answer is simple: results. The first families who had joined Nimrod returned to visit their relatives with stories that seemed too good to be true. They described a city where no one went hungry, where children learned from master craftsmen, where trade brought exotic goods from distant lands, where innovation happened daily. They brought proof, better tools, finer clothing, jewelry and ornaments unlike anything the scattered tribes had ever seen. But most convincingly, they brought confidence. These visitors no longer carried themselves like struggling nomads. They stood straighter, spoke with authority, radiated the unmistakable aura of people who belonged to something successful. The psychological impact was devastating. Suddenly, staying scattered seemed not just difficult, but backward, primitive, a waste of human potential. Let me ask you something. When you see someone who's clearly succeeded at something you're struggling with, what's your first instinct? To learn from them, right? To find out what they're doing differently. That's exactly what happened with Nimrod's city. Success attracted success. Prosperity drew more prosperity. Growth created momentum for more growth. The migration wasn't random either. Nimrod had developed sophisticated recruiting strategies. He sent his most persuasive followers to specific tribes, armed with exactly the right arguments for each group. To the mountain dwellers, they emphasized security and protection from harsh weather. To the southern tribes, they highlighted technological innovations and improved tools. To the eastern communities, they focused on trade opportunities and exotic goods. Each message was tailored, but the core promise remained the same: join us and become more than you ever could alone. And it worked. Oh man, did it work. Within a generation, Shinar had transformed from an empty valley into the world's first metropolis. Streets laid out in careful grids, districts organized by profession and ethnicity, infrastructure that supported tens of thousands of people. The newcomers didn't just find homes, they found identity, purpose, a sense of participating in something historic. Craftsmen who had worked alone their entire lives suddenly found themselves in workshops with dozens of colleagues. Farmers who had struggled to feed their families joined agricultural cooperatives that produced food for thousands. Traders who had dealt with neighboring tribes now managed commerce that spanned continents. Everyone became better at what they did. Knowledge multiplied exponentially when it was shared rather than hoarded. But the most important innovation wasn't technological, it was social. Nimrod had created something unprecedented: a unified human identity that transcended tribal boundaries. In his city, people stopped identifying primarily as descendants of Shem, Ham, or Japheth. They became citizens of something larger, something that felt permanent, citizens of Babel. The city developed its own culture, its own traditions, its own sense of destiny. Children born there didn't dream of returning to their parents' tribal homelands. They dreamed of making the city even greater than it already was. And that's when Nimrod unveiled the next phase of his plan. The phase that would either establish his city as humanity's permanent capital or destroy everything he had built. If you're fascinated by how quickly human societies can transform, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We dive deep into these pivotal moments in history that changed everything. And honestly, understanding Babel helps explain so much about our modern world's rapid changes. I'm curious, in our connected age, do you think we're experiencing our own version of gathering? Are social media platforms, global corporations, and international organizations creating a kind of digital Babel? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Coming up next, we'll discover Nimrod's master plan. The construction project so ambitious that it promised to solve humanity's greatest fear forever. We'll learn about the tower that was never supposed to be just a building, but a statement that would reshape the relationship between heaven and earth. But here's the chilling part. The tower wasn't Nimrod's idea. It came from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that should have been his first warning that he was about to cross a line that should never be crossed. It started with a dream. Not the metaphorical kind. An actual dream that came to Nimrod in the dead of night. So vivid and compelling that he woke up knowing exactly what he had to do next. But was it a dream from God? Or from something else entirely? Picture Nimrod at the height of his power, standing on the highest building in his magnificent city. Below him, thousands of people go about their daily lives in peace and prosperity. Trade routes stretch to every horizon. His influence extends farther than any human leader before him. By any measure, he has succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. So why isn't he satisfied? Because Nimrod has realized something terrifying. Everything he's built could disappear overnight. Disease could strike his concentrated population. A natural disaster could destroy the city. Political infighting could tear apart the unity he's worked so hard to create. Worst of all, people might simply decide to leave, scattering back across the earth just as randomly as they had gathered. How do you make something permanent when human nature itself seems designed for change? That's when the dream came. Nimrod found himself standing in a place he'd never seen before, a vast construction site buzzing with activity. Workers moved with purpose and precision, building something that defied imagination. Not just a building, but a structure that rose so high it disappeared into the clouds above. In the dream, he heard a voice, though he could never remember later whether it was his own voice or someone else's. Build a tower that reaches to heaven itself. Make it so tall, so magnificent, so permanent, that no one will ever doubt the power of unified humanity. Make it a landmark visible from anywhere on Earth, so that no matter how far people travel, they will always know where home is. But the voice promised something even more tantalizing. Make it tall enough, and you can reach the realm of the gods themselves. You can eliminate the distance between heaven and earth, you can ensure that humanity never again lives at the mercy of divine whims. Nimrod woke up with his heart pounding and his mind racing. The dream had felt more real than reality itself. And the more he thought about it, the more brilliant it seemed. A tower, not just any tower, but one that would serve multiple revolutionary purposes. First, it would be a monument to human achievement. Proof that when people work together, nothing is impossible. Every tribe that saw it would understand immediately what unity could accomplish. Second, it would be a navigational landmark visible from vast distances. No matter how far travelers went, they could always see the tower and find their way home. It would literally prevent scattering by always calling people back. Third, and most importantly, it would be humanity's declaration of independence from uncertainty. By reaching toward heaven itself, it would establish a permanent connection between the human and divine realms. No more guessing about God's will. No more living in fear of divine judgment. No more floods or disasters or any of the calamities that had plagued humanity since the beginning. The tower would make humans equal partners with God rather than subjects living at his mercy. When Nimrod shared his vision with his closest advisors, their reaction was immediate and unanimous. This was exactly what humanity needed. They began planning immediately. The structure would need to be massive, broader at the base than any building ever constructed. It would need revolutionary engineering techniques to reach unprecedented heights. It would require resources from across the known world and coordination of labor on a scale never before attempted. But most importantly, it would need to inspire absolute dedication from every person involved. This couldn't just be a construction project. It had to be a crusade, a holy mission that united all of humanity around a single transcendent purpose. Nimrod proved to be as brilliant at motivation as he was at organization. He didn't just announce the tower project, he revealed it as humanity's destiny. For too long, he declared to the assembled crowds, we have lived scattered and afraid. We have accepted our limitations as natural. We have bowed to forces beyond our control. But we were made for something greater. We were created in God's image, which means we were created to build, to achieve, to transcend. The crowd listened with growing excitement. This tower will be our ladder to heaven, our bridge between what is and what could be, our guarantee that humanity will never again be at the mercy of forces beyond our control. But then Nimrod said something that should have been a warning to anyone paying attention. When we complete this tower, we will make a name for ourselves that will never be forgotten. We will prove that unified humanity can achieve anything, even reaching into the realm of God himself. Did you catch that? Make a name for ourselves. Not honor God or serve his purposes, but establish human reputation and power. The shift was subtle but crucial. What had started as a practical solution to human problems was becoming something else entirely, a challenge to the cosmic order itself. If you're seeing the warning signs here, hit that like button. It's amazing how ambition can gradually transform from serving others to serving ourselves. The construction began within weeks, and from the very first day, it was clear that this project would be unlike anything humanity had ever attempted. The scale, the complexity, the sheer audacity of it all drew workers and resources from every corner of the known world. But there was something else drawing attention to the tower, something that should have terrified everyone involved instead of exciting them. The project was working too well, progressing too smoothly, succeeding too completely. Coming up next, we'll witness the construction of humanity's most ambitious project. We'll see how Nimrod organized the labor of thousands, revolutionized engineering and architecture, and created supply chains that spanned continents. We'll discover innovations that wouldn't be seen again for millennia. But we'll also see the first signs that this project was attracting attention from realms far beyond human understanding. And we'll learn why unprecedented success is sometimes the most dangerous thing that can happen to human ambition. The sound must have been incredible. Imagine 10,000 hammers striking in rhythm, the creak and groan of pulleys lifting massive stones, the calls of workers coordinating across vast distances, the rumble of ox-drawn carts carrying materials from the far reaches of the earth. The Tower of Babel wasn't just being built, it was being born from the collective will of humanity itself. Nimrod had transformed his city into the world's first industrial complex. Every street, every building, every person served the great project. Kilns fired bricks day and night, their flames visible from miles away. Quarries carved stone from distant mountains. Rivers were redirected to support the massive construction effort. The engineering challenges were mind-boggling. How do you lift blocks weighing several tons to heights no human had ever reached? How do you maintain structural integrity as a building rises far beyond anything previously attempted? How do you coordinate the labor of thousands of workers without modern communication systems? Nimrod's builders solved every problem with innovations that seemed to come from nowhere. They developed pulley systems using counterweights and mechanical advantage that multiplied human strength exponentially. They created ramps that spiraled around the tower's exterior, allowing workers and materials to reach ever higher levels. They invented new techniques for mixing mortar that would remain strong under unprecedented stress. Most impressively, they developed a communication system using flags, horns, and signals that allowed instant coordination across the entire construction site. Workers on different levels could communicate with perfect precision, moving as if controlled by a single mind. The materials came from everywhere. Cedar wood from Lebanon, precious stones from the mountains of the east, metals from lands so distant that few people even knew they existed. The tower consumed the wealth of the known world, and somehow there was always more. But the most revolutionary innovation wasn't technological, it was organizational. Nimrod had created something unprecedented, a perfectly efficient human society. Every person had a specific role that contributed to the greater purpose. Every skill was utilized, every resource was optimized. There was no waste, no conflict, no inefficiency. Workers were organized into teams that functioned like living machines. The brick makers produced exactly the right number of bricks needed daily. The mortar mixers prepared precisely the right consistency for each type of construction. The stone cutters shaped blocks to specifications so exact that they fit together without gaps. It was beautiful, terrifying, and absolutely unnatural. Here's what the ancient texts don't tell you explicitly, but what becomes clear when you read between the lines. The tower's construction was proceeding too smoothly. Real human projects involve setbacks, delays, conflicts, and mistakes. But the Tower of Babel seemed to build itself, as if guided by an intelligence beyond human capability. Workers reported strange experiences. They would sleep and dream of the next day's work, waking with perfect knowledge of their tasks. Difficult engineering problems would solve themselves overnight. Materials would arrive exactly when needed, from suppliers no one remembered contacting. The tower began to develop its own momentum, its own life, its own will. And as it rose higher, something else began to happen. The people building it started to change. At first, the changes were subtle. Workers became more focused, more efficient, more single-minded in their dedication to the project. They needed less sleep, felt less hunger, experienced fewer distractions. Families noticed that their loved ones talked about nothing but the tower. Children played games involving blocks and building. Adults dreamed about construction techniques and architectural innovations. The tower wasn't just being built by the people of Babel, it was building them into something new, something unified, something that had never existed before in human history. A collective human consciousness focused on a single, transcendent goal. Now, if you're finding this as fascinating as I am, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. Stories like this, about humanity's biggest successes and failures, are exactly what we explore on this channel. The tower's height began to astound even its builders. From the upper levels, the earth curved away in all directions. Rivers looked like silver threads. Forests appeared as green carpets. The entire world seemed smaller, more manageable, more conquerable. But the most remarkable change happened in the workers themselves. People who had come from different tribes with different languages and customs began to think and speak with perfect unity. Not just cooperation, actual unity of thought and purpose. They developed their own culture, their own traditions, their own understanding of reality. And at the center of it all was a growing conviction that they were engaged in something sacred, something that would transform not just their own lives, but the fundamental relationship between humanity and the divine. The tower became more than a construction project. It became a prayer made of stone and brick, a declaration written in architecture, a statement that rose higher each day toward heaven itself. But prayers can be answered in ways we don't expect, and statements can provoke responses we're not prepared for. High above the construction site, in realms beyond human understanding, the tower was attracting attention, the kind of attention that would change everything. Because there's something the people of Babel didn't understand about their perfect unity, their flawless cooperation, their unprecedented success. It wasn't entirely human. Coming up next, we'll discover the warning signs that everyone chose to ignore. We'll witness the moment when nature itself began to rebel against the tower's construction. And we'll learn why perfect human cooperation might be the most dangerous thing that could ever happen to our species. But here's the question that should keep you awake tonight. In our hyper-connected world, are we experiencing our own version of Babel's dangerous unity? Are social media algorithms, global supply chains, and artificial intelligence creating the same kind of collective consciousness that terrified heaven itself? Animals were the first to know something was wrong. Dogs in Babel began howling at night for no apparent reason. Horses refused to approach the tower's construction site. Birds that had nested in the city for generations suddenly abandoned their homes, flying in confused circles before disappearing toward distant horizons. The workers noticed, but they didn't listen. They were too focused on their great achievement to pay attention to what seemed like minor disturbances. But the signs were everywhere, if anyone had been willing to see them. Cracks appeared in buildings that had stood solid for decades. These weren't normal structural problems. They followed patterns that made no architectural sense. The cracks would appear overnight, snake through walls in impossible configurations, then mysteriously seal themselves by morning. The very ground beneath Babel began to shift and tremble. Not earthquakes, something subtler, but more disturbing. The earth itself seemed to be responding to the tower's growing height with unease, as if the planet could sense that something unnatural was rising from its surface. Weather patterns around the city became increasingly erratic. Storms would form directly over the tower, then dissipate without producing rain. Lightning would strike the upper levels repeatedly, always from clear skies. The strikes left scorch marks that faded quickly, but returned in exactly the same places. And then there were the dreams. Not everyone in Babel was experiencing the focused, productive dreams that helped the construction. Some people, usually the oldest residents, those who remembered life before Nimrod's vision, began having nightmares that felt more real than waking life. They dreamed of the tower stretching so high that it punctured the sky itself. They saw the structure becoming a ladder for things that shouldn't climb between heaven and earth. They watched in horror as the tower's completion opened doorways that were meant to stay closed forever. These dreamers tried to share their visions, but no one wanted to listen. The project was going too well to entertain doubts now. The tower was rising faster than anyone had dared hope. Resources continued to flow from every corner of the world. The unity among workers had reached levels that seemed almost supernatural. Why question success? But some of the warning signs were impossible to ignore. Workers at the tower's highest levels began reporting strange experiences. They described feeling disconnected from their own bodies, as if they were watching themselves work from a distance. They spoke of hearing voices that seemed to come from the stone itself, guiding their hands and directing their efforts. Most disturbing of all, they reported losing track of time. Workers would begin a task in the morning and suddenly find themselves completing it at sunset, with no memory of the hours in between. They had become so perfectly focused that they were losing their individual consciousness. The tower was making them into something more efficient than human beings. And they liked it. Religious leaders from surrounding regions began arriving in Babel with messages of concern. They brought warnings from their communities about unusual phenomena occurring wherever the tower was visible. Springs were drying up. Crops were failing mysteriously. Domestic animals were becoming restless and difficult to manage. It was as if the tower's presence was disrupting the natural order far beyond Babel's borders. But Nimrod dismissed these warnings as jealousy from communities that hadn't achieved Babel's level of success. He pointed to his city's continued prosperity, the tower's impressive progress, and the perfect harmony among his people as proof that their project had divine blessing. After all, would God allow such success if he disapproved of their efforts? The question revealed the fundamental flaw in Nimrod's reasoning. He had assumed that success equals approval. That achievement proves righteousness. That human prosperity automatically indicates divine blessing. He had forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous path is the one that leads exactly where you wanted to go. The tower continued to rise. Each day brought it closer to heights no human structure had ever reached. Each level completed felt like a triumph over the limitations that had defined human existence since creation. But something else was rising along with the tower, a sense of power that went beyond human capability, a confidence that transcended human wisdom, a unity that eliminated human individuality. The people of Babel were becoming something new, something that had never existed before in human history. Something was about to discover why certain boundaries exist for very good reasons. I have to ask you, are you seeing parallels to our modern world? Hit that like button if you've noticed how technology and social media are creating similar patterns of collective thinking, loss of individual identity, and disconnect from natural rhythms. The most chilling warning sign came from the children. Kids who had grown up in Babel's shadow began speaking in unison without planning to. They would start sentences individually and finish them together, as if they were sharing the same thoughts. They played identical games without discussing them first. They drew pictures of the tower that were eerily similar in detail and perspective. The children were becoming a hive mind, and their parents thought it was wonderful. Perfect cooperation, flawless communication, absolute unity of purpose. Everything Nimrod had dreamed of achieving was finally happening. But late at night, when the construction sounds finally quieted and the city settled into sleep, a few residents could swear they heard something else, a sound that seemed to come from very far above, so far that it might have been coming from heaven itself. Footsteps, getting closer. Coming up next, we'll witness the day that changed human history forever. The moment when perfect unity met absolute authority. We'll discover what really happened when God came down to see the tower, and why his response was so swift and so final. But here's what will shock you. God didn't destroy the tower because it was evil. He scattered humanity because they were succeeding too well. The tower was about to accomplish exactly what it was designed to do, and that terrified heaven itself. It happened on a Tuesday morning, just an ordinary workday in Babel, with thousands of people heading to their tasks at the great tower. The sun rose as it always did. The birds sang their usual songs. The city stirred to life exactly as it had for countless mornings before. No one expected that before sunset, human civilization would be changed forever. The day started with remarkable progress on the tower. The workers moved with their usual supernatural efficiency. Materials flowed to where they were needed. Problems solved themselves almost before they appeared. The structure continued its relentless climb toward the heavens. But something was different in the air. Animals throughout the city seemed restless. Children playing in the streets kept looking up at the sky, as if expecting something to appear. Even the workers, focused as they were, occasionally paused and glanced upward with expressions of unease they couldn't explain. By mid-morning, the feeling of anticipation had become so strong that people began gathering in the streets, staring at the tower's peak as if waiting for something to happen. They didn't have to wait long. At exactly noon, when the sun stood directly overhead, the sky above Babel began to change. Not darkening with clouds or brightening with unusual light, changing in a way that human language couldn't adequately describe then and still can't today. The air itself seemed to thicken. Reality became more solid, more present, more absolutely there than it had ever been before. It was as if the entire universe had suddenly snapped into perfect focus. And then, in a voice that didn't come from any human throat, words that weren't spoken in any human language filled the air above the city. "Come, let us go down and see what humanity has accomplished." The voice carried authority that made every person in Babel freeze where they stood. Workers on the tower stopped mid-motion. Children ceased their playing. Merchants abandoned their transactions. The entire city held its breath. But here's what's truly remarkable about this moment. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't threatening. It was almost impressed. Like a parent discovering that their child had accomplished something far beyond their expected capabilities. And that's when the really terrifying part began. Nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Those words echoed across Babel with the weight of absolute truth. This wasn't condemnation, it was recognition. God himself was acknowledging that human unity had achieved something unprecedented, something that was about to break the boundaries he had established for creation itself. The tower hadn't failed. It had succeeded too well. What happened next changed human civilization in ways we're still living with today. Instead of destroying the tower or punishing the builders, God did something far more elegant and far more permanent. He didn't attack their achievement. He altered their ability to achieve. The change began subtly. Workers calling to each other across the construction site noticed that their colleagues seemed confused by simple instructions. Foremen barking orders found their crews staring at them with blank expressions. Conversations that should have been automatic became halting and uncertain. At first, people assumed it was fatigue or distraction. The project had been demanding, and everyone was working at their absolute limits. A little confusion was understandable, but the confusion was spreading and getting worse. By early afternoon, something truly bizarre was happening. People who had worked together for years were suddenly unable to understand each other, not just having communication problems, literally unable to comprehend what their colleagues were saying. The unified language that had allowed perfect coordination was fracturing. Words that had meant one thing in the morning meant something completely different by the afternoon. Sentences that everyone had understood were becoming gibberish, but it wasn't random gibberish. Groups of people were developing new languages together, almost as if they were being sorted into linguistic tribes that emerged spontaneously from their confusion. The brickmakers found themselves speaking one new language. The stonecutters developed another. The mortar mixers began communicating in a third. Each group could understand itself perfectly, but no group could communicate with any other. The perfect unity that had made the tower possible was dissolving in real time. Panic set in as people realized what was happening. Families were losing the ability to talk to each other. Spouses found themselves speaking different languages. Parents couldn't communicate with their own children. The construction site became chaos. Workers who had moved like parts of a single machine were now stumbling around in confusion, unable to coordinate even the simplest tasks. Pulley systems stopped working because the operators couldn't communicate. Supply chains broke down because no one could understand the delivery instructions. In a matter of hours, the most organized human effort in history became the most confused. But here's the part that should terrify you. The language confusion wasn't random. Each new language group was naturally drawn to different parts of the world. The people speaking one language felt an irresistible urge to travel east. Another group was pulled toward the south. A third was drawn to the northern mountains. God wasn't just breaking up their communication. He was scattering them across the earth, fulfilling his original command that they had tried so hard to avoid. If you're following this story and seeing how it connects to our modern struggles with communication and unity, please hit that like button. Understanding Babel helps explain so much about our current world. By evening, the great tower stood silent, not because it was completed, but because no one could coordinate well enough to continue building it. The project that had seemed destined to reach heaven itself was abandoned in a single day. The city that had represented humanity's greatest achievement became a ghost town almost overnight. Families packed their belongings and headed toward whatever horizon called to them in their new language. Communities that had lived in perfect harmony for years dissolved as if they had never existed. Nimrod himself was left standing at the base of his unfinished tower, watching his life's work crumble, not because it had failed, but because it had succeeded too well. His vision of unified humanity had been so complete, so effective, so dangerous, that God himself had to intervene to prevent it from reshaping the entire cosmic order. Coming up next, we'll witness the aftermath of the Great Scattering. We'll see how the unified people of Babel became the diverse nations of the earth, and we'll discover why this moment of apparent disaster was actually humanity's salvation. But here's the question that should haunt you. In our globally connected world, are we rebuilding the Tower of Babel in digital form? And if we are, what will God's response look like this time? The morning after the language confusion, Babel looked like a city under siege. But there were no enemy armies at the gates. The enemy was inside every household, every workplace, every family. Parents woke up unable to understand their children's words. Husbands and wives found themselves speaking in languages that sounded foreign to each other. Brothers and sisters, who had shared thoughts and dreams their entire lives, suddenly couldn't communicate even basic needs. The perfect unity that had taken years to build had shattered in a single day. But something even stranger was happening. Along with the language confusion came an irresistible urge to travel, not random wandering, specific, directional pulling that felt as natural as breathing. Groups of people who could still understand each other felt drawn to the same destinations. The brick makers, now speaking their own unique language, found themselves packing for a journey east. The stone cutters were pulled toward the southern mountains. The merchants felt an overwhelming need to travel west. It was as if an invisible hand was sorting humanity into tribes and pointing each tribe toward a different corner of the earth. Families faced impossible choices: stay together and struggle to communicate, or follow the language groups they could understand and leave loved ones behind. Most chose understanding over blood relationships. Within days, Babel was experiencing the largest migration in human history. Not people fleeing disaster, but people following an internal compass that was leading them away from each other. The great roads that had brought tribes together were now carrying them apart. Caravans that had arrived in Babel filled with hope and excitement departed carrying confusion and loss. But here's what's remarkable about this scattering. It wasn't chaotic. Despite the confusion, despite the fear, despite the heartbreak of separation, the migration proceeded with an order that suggested divine coordination. Each group had exactly the skills they would need for their new homeland. The people drawn to mountains knew about stoneworking and mining. Those pulled toward rivers understood irrigation and agriculture. The groups heading for forests carried knowledge of woodcraft and hunting. God wasn't just scattering humanity randomly. He was redistributing human knowledge and capability across the entire earth. The tower itself stood abandoned, its upper levels reaching toward heaven, but its base surrounded by empty streets and silent workshops. All that magnificent organization, all that revolutionary cooperation, all that unprecedented achievement, gone in a matter of days. Nimrod remained in the city longer than most, standing at the base of his unfinished tower, trying to understand what had happened. The man who had united humanity watched it divide before his eyes. The leader who had promised permanent security witnessed the collapse of everything he had built. But even Nimrod eventually felt the pull. His language group was drawn toward the southern lands, toward territories that would become the great empires of antiquity. He left Babel not as a conqueror, but as a refugee from his own success. The scattering took months to complete. Wave after wave of migration flowed out from Babel like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Each wave carried a different language group toward a different destiny. And as they traveled, something beautiful began to happen. The knowledge that had been concentrated in Babel, the innovations, the techniques, the discoveries, spread across the entire world. Instead of being hoarded in one city, human achievement was distributed among all nations. The arts of metalworking reached distant mountains. Agricultural innovations spread to fertile valleys. Architectural techniques traveled to every climate and geography. The achievements of Babel became the foundation for diverse civilizations around the globe. But the scattering accomplished something even more important than spreading knowledge. It preserved humanity from a danger they never saw coming. You see, the perfect unity of Babel hadn't just been about cooperation. It had been about the gradual elimination of individual thought, personal choice, and human diversity. The tower builders had been becoming a hive mind, efficient, coordinated, and ultimately inhuman. By scattering them, God saved humanity from losing its humanity. The different languages forced people to develop different ways of thinking. Separated geographical locations led to different cultures, different innovations, different solutions to common problems. The diversity that seemed like punishment was actually preservation. Humanity became stronger through division than it had ever been through unity. Now, if you're seeing connections between Babel's story and our modern world's struggles with globalization, technology, and cultural unity, you're not alone. Hit that like button if this ancient story is helping you understand current events in a new way. The scattered tribes faced tremendous challenges in their new homelands. They had to relearn skills that had been specialized in Babel. They had to develop new forms of government, new social structures, new ways of organizing community life. But they also discovered something wonderful. Human creativity flourishes under adversity. The challenges of building new civilizations in unfamiliar territories sparked innovations that never would have emerged in Babel's perfect efficiency. The descendants of the tower builders became the founders of Egypt, Babylon, Greece, India, China, and every other great civilization. Each culture developed its own unique character, its own special contributions to human knowledge, its own understanding of the divine. The scattering that seemed like humanity's greatest disaster became its greatest blessing. The tower remained empty and unfinished, as a monument to what had almost happened. Travelers who passed through the abandoned city in later years reported a strange atmosphere around the structure. The air itself seemed to remember the voices that had once coordinated its construction. Some claimed they could still hear the echo of perfect human unity in the wind that whistled through the tower's upper levels. Others swore they could sense the presence of forces that had once guided the builders' hands. The tower became a warning and a reminder. Human achievement is magnificent, but human ambition can reach too far. Coming up in our final chapter, we'll discover how Babel's influence shaped every civilization that followed. We'll explore the tower's legacy in modern architecture, technology, and global politics. And we'll answer the most important question of all. Are we building another Tower of Babel right now? And if we are, what can we learn from the first one's fate? Here's something that will blow your mind. The Tower of Babel was never destroyed. It's still being built today, in forms you probably never recognized. Walk through any major city and look up at the skyscrapers piercing the clouds. Drive past massive corporate campuses where thousands of people work in perfect coordination. Log on to social media platforms that connect billions of humans in real-time communication. Check your smartphone that gives you instant access to all human knowledge. Sound familiar? Every ambitious construction project, every attempt at global unity, every technology that promises to eliminate human limitations, they're all echoes of Nimrod's original vision. The tower keeps rising, just in different forms. But before we explore how Babel's story connects to our modern world, let me ask you something. If you found this deep dive into ancient history helpful for understanding current events, could you take a second to subscribe to the channel? We explore these connections between ancient wisdom and modern challenges all the time. The physical Tower of Babel might have been abandoned, but its psychological and spiritual blueprint survived in human consciousness. Every generation has produced leaders who promise to solve humanity's problems through unity, technology, and ambitious construction projects. Think about it. The European Union promises continental unity through shared governance. The United Nations aims for global cooperation through international law. Technology companies offer worldwide connection through digital platforms. Each promises what Nimrod promised: security through unity, prosperity through cooperation, transcendence through human achievement. And just like Babel, these modern towers often work brilliantly, until they don't. The ancient ruins of Babel became a pilgrimage site for travelers and scholars throughout history. They came to see the place where humanity had almost achieved the impossible, where perfect cooperation had briefly existed, where the boundary between earth and heaven had nearly been crossed. But they also came to remember what had been lost when unity became too complete. Archaeological evidence suggests that the historical Tower of Babel influenced every major construction project that followed. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the pyramids of Egypt, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, all bore architectural signatures that traced back to innovations first developed in Nimrod's city. More importantly, the social and political structures of Babel became the template for every empire that followed. The organization of specialized labor, the coordination of massive resources, the creation of unified cultural identity. These techniques spread across the ancient world like seeds from a scattered tower. But so did the warnings about the dangers of too much unity, too much centralized power, too much human ambition. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century AD, described Babel as humanity's first attempt to create a world government. He understood that the tower was never just about building height. It was about concentrating human power in one place, under one authority, for one purpose. Early Christian theologians saw Babel as a preview of end times prophecies about global government and universal religion. They recognized that Nimrod's vision would return in new forms throughout history, always promising the same benefits and carrying the same dangers. Islamic traditions preserve similar warnings about the tower, describing it as humanity's first great rebellion against divine authority. Not rebellion through disobedience, but rebellion through excessive obedience to human leadership instead of divine guidance. All three major monotheistic religions agreed on this. Babel represented humanity's tendency to mistake human achievement for divine approval, human unity for spiritual truth, human power for cosmic authority. And they all warned that the pattern would repeat. Fast forward to our modern era, and the parallels are stunning. We live in a time of unprecedented global connection, coordination, and cooperation. Technology allows instant communication across vast distances. Supply chains span continents. Cultural influences spread worldwide overnight. We've achieved a level of human unity that would have amazed Nimrod himself. But we've also recreated many of Babel's warning signs. Loss of individual privacy, pressure to conform to global standards, the gradual elimination of local cultures in favor of universal norms, the concentration of power in the hands of a few tech giants and international organizations. Most concerning of all, we've developed the same psychology that drove Babel's builders. The belief that human problems require human solutions, that technology can transcend natural limitations, that unity automatically equals progress. The question isn't whether we're building another Tower of Babel. The question is whether we can learn from the first one's fate. Here's what I find most fascinating about Babel's legacy. It teaches us that human cooperation is both our greatest strength and our greatest vulnerability. United, we can achieve incredible things. But united too completely, we lose the diversity that makes us human. The scattering that seemed like punishment was actually preservation. By forcing humanity to develop different languages, cultures, and perspectives, God saved us from becoming a single, monolithic entity that would have been powerful, but ultimately soulless. Our modern challenge is finding the balance. How do we cooperate enough to solve global problems without surrendering the diversity that sparks creativity? How do we unite enough to achieve great things without losing the individual identity that makes life meaningful? The Tower of Babel offers no easy answers, but it does provide a crucial warning. Beware of any movement that promises perfect unity, any technology that eliminates all obstacles, any leader who claims their vision will solve humanity's fundamental problems. such promises usually lead to the same place: a tower that reaches toward heaven, but leaves its builders scattered and confused on earth. If this exploration of Babel's modern relevance has got you thinking, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you see Babel's pattern in our current world? What modern towers concern you most? How do we balance cooperation with diversity in our interconnected age? And if you found this deep dive valuable, please consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from understanding these ancient warnings about modern challenges. Sometimes the oldest stories have the most to teach us about where we're heading today. The Tower of Babel stands unfinished, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. Its shadow stretches across history, reminding each generation that human achievement is magnificent, but human ambition must be tempered by wisdom. Unity must be balanced by diversity. And reaching toward heaven requires remembering that we still have our feet planted firmly on earth. The tower may be ancient history, but its lesson is more relevant today than ever before. In our rush to build higher, connect more completely, and achieve unprecedented unity, we would do well to remember what happened the last time humanity tried to make a name for itself by reaching toward the realm of God. Some boundaries exist for very good reasons, and some towers are meant to remain unfinished. Thanks for joining me on this journey through one of history's most important and misunderstood stories. Until next time, keep asking the hard questions, keep seeking the deeper truths, and keep remembering that the most powerful stories are often the ones that warn us about the dangers of too much power.